So we are going to continue today with the lizards and snakes as soon as it loads. Who has this as their topic for? Yes, this is one of our group presentation topics. All right, so we're starting back here with one thing that was very unclear last time. So indeterminate growth is what she talked about in the zoo with fish, that they can continue to grow as large as possible. Determinate growth means that there's a certain point at which you cannot grow any longer. This is because the bones fully ossify, the growing centers fully ossify. Did anybody in here break a bone when they were very little? Okay. That's impressive. I had a cousin who broke a bone when he was a little kid, and the concern was that he broke it at his growth plate. Have you heard that word before, that phrase? Yes.
When I was 11, they had to x-ray my feet to see if my growth plates had close so I could get on coach shoes.
So then if our growth plates are fully ossified, we don't grow any larger. If you break a bone or have a problem with a growth plate, the concern becomes that, especially your legs, they would grow at different rates, which would be really problematic, wouldn't it? Because you have one potentially longer, significantly longer potentially, than the other. So that's why we worry about that in humans. But in animals, if the growth areas have fully ossified, you can't have much growth. When there's cartilage there or not complete ossification, you can get continued growth. When we talk about our snakes, some of them you're going to think can continue to grow as long as they want, but they do generally have a maximum size. That maximum size might be like 30 feet, but they have a maximum size. That's why you don't find garter snakes that are 20 feet long, do you? How long's the longest garter snake any of you have found?
2.
About 2? Maybe if we're real lucky, 3, but probably about 2. There's a certain point after which they cannot grow. And in our autonomous species where they practice tail autonomy, when they've lost the tail, that is not going to continue to grow any larger because it's been replaced, cartilage by the bone. So that's not going to actually continue to grow much longer in length. It's going to replace that section, but it's not going to then say reset and start growing to an indeterminate length. Within this group, we're generally talking about evolutionarily terrestrial tetrapods. Evolutionarily tetrapods because snakes, if we just look at them as a group, are not tetrapods, correct? How many feet do snakes have? None. Some maybe 2 rudimentary ones-ish, but generally none. So, and some of our lizards have no legs. So that's why these are evolutionarily a terrestrial tetrapod line. There are some secondary aquatics. You'll see this word come back up in the dinosaurs. You saw it in the turtles. You'll see it in the mammals. Do we know what that phrase, secondary aquatics, means? Mm-hmm. Because we've evolved from fish onto land, becoming terrestrial, and we have then, in some of these lineages, gone back to being aquatic. They have scales covering their skin. It makes them relatively impermeable to water. It also greatly decreases their water loss through the body's surface. Some of you on exam 2, which I forgot, sorry, wrote about how frog skin is really great because it's completely permeable to all diffusion of water, which is interesting because you all remember diffusion of water is actually osmosis, right? But there's a problem with that, because if they can lose and gain water easily through the skin, can they dry out pretty easily? We're going to find these guys living in areas where, for the most part, you won't find a lot of other things. Tetrapod lifestyle is common, but we will see reduction or loss of limbs is also common. They're the sister to the Archosaurs group, which we'll talk about. This is, I think, our next group. And the Tuatara lineage is a sister to your lizards and your snakes. And your snakes are the derivatives of the lizards. Which brings us to our sphenodonts, or the Tuatara. The sphenodontids, the main defining characteristic for this group are the acrodont teeth, which are fused to the top edge of the jaw. Most of our others are going to have florodont teeth, which are attached to the inner side of the jaw bone. Who has edition 7 of this book? 6? 8? 9? None, clearly. Anyone have 10? It's brand new. It's like $100 minimum. Minimum. Right. That's why I was like, you can use 8, 9. 7 works too. But they have different numbers for the species of Tuatara. That's why it's kind of important to kind of have an idea. And this is because this is, along with the fish, one of the things that has changed significantly through different editions. Because for a long time, we thought that there was just one species of Tuatara. They are native to New Zealand. They were formerly found in both North and South New Zealand. You're aware that New Zealand is 2 major islands. We define them as North and South, usually, and which was the one that the Lord of the Rings trilogy was filmed on.
The South.
Correct, the South.
In the fjord.
That's so weird. I was talking about this.
One of my grad professors taught a January class for undergrads, because Delaware had January classes where they would go to the ecology of New Zealand. And I think there was like a week-long portion where they did the ecology of Lord of the Rings filming sites, simply because he could. He was the one who made the syllabus, so he was like, we're going to all of the places where they filmed all of the things. That is what we do. When you're there, that is what you do. It also meant that I think he tried to convince them that Lord of the Rings was in fact required reading for a science class.
I think we should report on it. Yes.
But it does have some really interesting creatures in New Zealand that are native there. And the Tuatara is one that is found nowhere else. Nowhere else in the world. We believe, because they've been driven from Australia and other locations and driven away by humans. By human intervention, they could no longer continue to live there. And New Zealand takes a little bit longer than Australia to be colonized, at least extensively colonized. And Australia had originally been settled in part by Europeans as a prison colony. So there was a lot of weird lawlessness. The Aboriginals that are still left in Australia maintain portions of it, but it was kind of an interesting way that we took it and settled it. And we're like, it doesn't matter, like we did in North America, it doesn't matter that you live here, we're taking it. But in doing so, they also made Australia a stopping point for a lot of the ships that were then exploring the whole world, which meant that there was considerable slaughter of large animals throughout Australia. We'll talk more about that the end of the semester. But Australia and New Zealand serve as some of our places where we've been able to study pretty extensively the mass extinctions caused by humans of large animals. Many of them had no predators, so they didn't fear people. The dodo you've heard about, yes? You could walk up to it and pick it up by its neck. The ones next to it had no fear. They wouldn't understand to run away. Tuatara likely also lack that fear of human interaction because they didn't have predators. So they didn't, you had to be taught to fear strangers as a child, right? Because you've all, I'm sure, seen like a little 2-year-old at the grocery store who runs up and is like, hey, how are you? What's going on? What are you doing? What are you buying? We expect that a lot of animals that have grown up in areas without large predators have that same lack of fear response. But the tuatara was driven away from the mainland. The splodontid species Guntheri was found in 1877. They're on 30 islands off the coast, tiny, tiny islands. But it was never, the Guntheri species was never protected. The punctuous species was fully protected in 1885. The two species were so similar, they look identical, and mitochondrial data indicates that they may be a similar species, but they may be two. The question becomes, do we manage them as one species or two? Is it a single species with a large geographic range, or is it two species with smaller geographic range? You tell me.
Did you say two species with one geographic range or one with many big ranges?
Mm-hmm. These are the two representatives. We have punctuous and Guntheri. Do they look the same?
Can they breathe?
Maybe.
But like we would really
Likely.
get them to it in captivity.
In captivity, you probably could. But if they're not found on the same island, do they interbreed? No.
No.
So that's where it's one of those things of, is it one species, like a metapopulation of frog type of situation? Mm-hmm. Or is it a separate species? Managerially, it's easier to consider them one species because we have a protection plan for one and not the other. But there is still debate. I think edition 2 says there's, or edition of 8 of the textbook said there were 2 species, and edition 9 says there's 1, because they're basing it on mitochondrial data. The adults are about 60 centimeters long, so not completely large creatures. They're nocturnal. They eat invertebrates. They'll also take frogs, small lizards, and birds. While they bask in the sunlight, they constantly maintain a low body temperature, likely to be ectotherms. Their upper jaw has 1 tooth, and their lower jaw has 2 teeth. And they just kind of use their teeth to shear at their food, to kind of cut it like scissors. They live in burrows with dense colonies. The burrows tend to be about 2 to 3 meters apart at most. They may share the burrows with seabirds, which is kind of strange because they're known to eat birds at times. But usually the birds they're sharing the burrows with, they don't eat their offspring. They're too large for them to take. The males and the females are both territorial and maintain their own locations. We have discovered that their social interactions are a combination of vocalization, behavioral displays, and color changes, which are themes we're going to see through all of this group. And their ecology and their relationship in these areas is entirely due to the exploitation of the seabird colonies. Yes, they'll feed on some of the birds. They will absolutely feed on the nestlings. But the best reason to share the burrow with the seabirds is this. there are insects that eat the leftover food that the chicks don't eat. You can eat all of the insects that come. You can eat all of the leftovers. So they're exploiting the resource that the birds are giving them. So eating the birds and the chicks is kind of a last choice type of situation when you can eat the food that the mother and father birds bring to their nestling, or you can eat the insects that then come into the burrow to feast upon that food when the nestling doesn't eat it all. They are likely nocturnal due to the association with the seabirds, but nocturnal is not an ancestral trait for this lizard group. The nocturnal lifestyle is derived. It is likely that diurnal was the ancestral trait for this group. And the tuataras we have not well studied. Well, actually, we've pretty much well studied them for most of the lizard group comparatively, but we don't know a lot about them, in part because there's 1 or 2 species. Maybe when Mary comes back from New Zealand next year, she'll bring us pictures.
Yeah.
That brings us to the rest of our lizards and our snakes. The squamates is our generalized group name for just this section. Determinate growth is a significant derived character from this group. Their growth stops when the epiphyses, the EPIPHYSES, EPIPHYSES. Yeah. But I was like, I better spell it for those of you because it's not on here. When those fuse, think of those as like growth plates. When they fuse to the bone shafts, it can't grow anymore, the bone length. This is the same type of structure we see in birds and mammals. It's not seen in crocodiles and turtles. The suggestion is it's related to the insectivorous diet. Why? Why can you only get so large if your ancestors mainly ate insects?
The insects can only get so large.
Insects can only get so large. It's part of it.
You can't get enough energy from insects to maintain.
Because insects are relatively tiny, it's going to take a whole lot of insects to maintain enough energy for that whole body if you keep growing continuously on it.
And it would also get harder to hunt them.
Get much harder to hunt your insects.
Especially if you're like digging into burrows or anthills or things like that.
So there's an energetic issue here of needing a lot of food, and then there's an issue of actually, an ecological issue of actually being able to get the said quantity of food that you need. And there's only so many hours in a day they can hunt too, right? It's not only the ease of actually finding it, but the hours of day that it would take of finding it. So when their diet was mainly insects, it makes sense that at a certain point you stop growing larger. And by larger here, we generally mean taller, longer, that type of thing. Our fossil record's incomplete. We know that most of the large groups had diverged by the end of the Jurassic, but we don't quite have enough information about all of the relationships here and how every group fits together. Some of them are mostly well understood. The iguana and the Scleroglossa are 2 separate lineages. So the geckos, the skinks, the burrowing lizards, and the snakes, 1 lineage. The chameleons, the iguanidae, and then our non-monophyletic agamidae are separate, or that's separate lineage. And we are going to look at both lineages. One of the things we're going to spend a little bit more time on with this group than some of the others is a little bit more with behavioral modifications, I'm hoping. So the spiny swift at the top, a Jopalure, a black iguana, and a mastigar. Here we have the horned lizard, the spiny devil, the tokay gecko, African chameleon, North American glass lizard, and the monitor lizard. All lizards. just under 5,000 species of lizards. They range in size from geckos that are less than 3 centimeters long to the Komodo dragon, which is 3 meters long, 75 kilograms at its kind of largest. And the the Komodo is one of the monitor lizards, so they do fall at that upper end of the scale. But 80% of our lizards weigh less than 20 grams. Most are very tiny. And have you seen lizards on campus? How big?
Small.
Mary, how big was the one you saw?
Small.
It's like this? Most
Yeah.
of them? A couple inches?
Mm.
That makes sense for most of these lizards, doesn't it? We might be talking something like this. They're ectotherms. Do they need to eat as much as an endotherm? No. Their bodies are generally going to weigh less. Their digestive tracts are going to be modified for their lifestyle. Their musculature is going to be less than that of an endotherm. They don't need to stay as warm. They don't need to do as much metabolism. A lot of them are going to be arboreal. Some of them that are arboreal specialize on feeding on just ants. Lizards have done well adapting to human environments. Some species have done very, very well. Do any of you have lizards at home that eat out of your trash cans? Maybe not. Here, one of my roommates from grad school moved to Florida. She has geckos in her screened-in porch every single day. She has them climbing all over her potted plants, in her vegetable gardens, eating her insects. They love actually having them in their screened-in porch because it eats a lot of the insects that would, the geckos and some of the other lizards will eat all the insects that they would otherwise need to worry about. It's great. But it also means sometimes you open the door in the morning and you have a screen door covered in lizards. Very different than our concerns of opening our doors and, well, actually they still get devoured by mosquitoes. Doesn't eat all of the mosquitoes in the yard. Otherwise, I think we would import some into our little field site out here.
Yeah.
For you. Chameleons are the zygodactylus ones with their toes going in 2 different directions. You can see him here with his toes pointing in different directions. The one at the top, you can see the toes are pointing in different directions. In our owls, they usually point like this in complete separate directions. With these guys, they're at least usually about 90 degrees separate. It allows them to have a great gripping of what they're walking on. The chameleons have a projectile tongue, and it does have a sticky end to it to trap food. And those cone eyes that move in different directions allow them to have great eyesight because of moving them independently. Your largest lizards tend to be herbivores. They might live in the trees. Iguanas. They may live on the beach. The beach habitat offers your large lizards something very, very important: an overall absence of general predators. So they've been able to grow large there. They'll survive there when others might not have been able to survive. Very few of them will swim, and those that do keep their dives to generally 10 meters or less. Your marine iguanas, as I mentioned last time, feed on seaweed. The main exception to the large liver herbivores are your monitor livers, varanids, which are your active predators. What do they eat? Do you think? I mentioned things they could take down last time.
Gazelle or buffalo.
Small water buffalo, gazelle. So they're gonna eat mammals. What else do you think they could eat? They live on a beach. What might there be a lot of?
Birds.
Lots of birds. They may also eat invertebrates too. especially your large invertebrates. Remember that our beaches also may have a lot of things like crabs that could make a good large size snack. They have a separate respiratory system from most of your other lizards because they are so large. They actually do need to worry about that respiration, locomotion, confusion issue. So they have a gular pump system that creates the positive and negative pressure exchanges necessary. The maximum size of things they tend to take are goats or small deer. While they can take a water buffalo, it has to be a small one, and they need to be really, really hungry. And usually you'll need a couple of them to take down something that size. But as you can see, they can take down a gazelle, small one. The way that these lizards hunt is really similar to mammalian predators, very similar. Stalking of the prey, ambush attack. They slash at the prey, kind of like a lion or a tiger might slash at it, grab at it, bite at it. But they're a little bit different. Komodo dragons have something that lions and tigers don't to help with hunting. Anyone want to take a guess?
Disease, like bacteria.
Usually, yes, but they also have venom glands in their mouth.
Hmm.
So if you can bite your prey and inject them with venom, you just have to let the venom do its job and wait. And then when it's down on the ground, you can take it easily. So you bite it, inject it with venom, let it run around, let it get exhausted, then you just lumber on over and you've got dinner. Sounds good for a predator, doesn't it? Lions and tigers would do far less effort for hunting if they had this. But they tend to also ambush their prey in trails, and they'll rest in sunny valleys looking for their prey. It seems that they have a higher understanding of knowledge, of information, a high level of learning compared to what we expect from lizards. Very complex learning and behaviors because they display the type of predator styles that we see in top mammalian predators. They know where their prey tend to go during different times of day, during different seasons, and they tend to follow them. They are not opportunistic hunters like most of our lizards are. They are very purposeful, it's planned out. We believe because of this, they have succeeded in areas where mammalian predators were absent from the ecosystem and absent from the food web. So they're that top level tertiary, usually, predator for your food web, and they've taken over that position. And lizards have had limb reduction at least 60 times. Why is leglessness good? Because to lose limbs, it has to be a step in the right direction. It has to be good. Take a guess. Why? Where would legs get in your way?
Small crevices.
Small crevices.
Yeah, I was gonna say like, and like rocks, like broken habitats.
So rocky habitat. Where else?
Hot habitats so that they can burrow.
Burrowing. All of those things. So leglessness is going to work in areas where your legs become a hindrance. Burrowing is a big thing where having legs can get in the way, because even those that burrow don't use whatever leg vestiges they have really for digging their burrow. They just use it for getting into the ground. They're still going to use their skull modifications for digging. It's also good in grass and shrubbery where you really need to be able to get in and around tight positions. And when we've seen limb reduction, we've also seen another trade-off in the body. The body has usually gotten longer. It's thin and elongated along with that loss of limbs. So that elongated body is going to work well in rocks, in rocky areas. It's going to work well with spreading out the heat that they're absorbing, so you don't have just the tiny little feet getting very hot, spreading out the heat you're bringing in and or the heat you're releasing. Brings us to these guys, your fossorial lizards. We saw that most of them are legless, except for the bipede species from Mexico. 3 species have well-developed forelimbs, entirely used for breaking into the ground surface. Once they have their burrow, they're going to use their skull to make it larger and longer. So those claws are just for breaking into the ground surface. Anyone guess what the genus name there means? Very close. Double walk.
Double what?
Double walk. Or double walking. Very similar to, so like bipedal, 2 for walk. So we have 2 legs. It may mean double walk also in another language. Their skin is really a tube in which the body is going to slide. Their muscles are separated from their skin. Yours are not, are they? They're attached. It allows them to move back and forth in the skin that they have. They have 1 tooth in the upper jaw and 2 teeth in the lower jaw, similar to a group we just talked about. And it allows them to bite pieces out of prey. But what this does is it allows them to eat bigger things that are bigger than their head, because they can shear it into tiny pieces in order to eat it. They have multiple different types of skull styles. Blunt heads, shovel snouted, and wedge snouted are our 3 main groups. The blunt heads ram into the soil and then turn the head. They rotate it to push the soil away. The shovel snouted make a tunnel, and as they're running down it, they just kind of smash their head up against it and continue growing the tunnel by smashing the soil to the top wall. The wedge snouted compress it against the sides of the tunnel with the skull. You can see all 3 represented here. B, C, and D are representing the 3 types. Some of them are less specialized than this, though. Some of them can kind of do all of these because their head isn't quite as specialized. And when you have a choice, or no, if I were to say to you, okay, so we have 3 different types of specialized ones and then 1 generalist, which one would you expect would displace the others in an environment? Would you expect there to be that the specialized ones would be able to replace the generalists, that specialized would thrive where generalists would not? We see the opposite in these groups. We don't know why. And we see that there is some difference where they live depending upon their specializations. The more specialized ones tend to live in areas with more soil, with deeper soil, with more compacted soil. The blunt head ones tend to outcompete the rest, even though they don't make their tunnels as compacted as the others, even though they're not as good as the others, because there's been a problem. When you specialize your snout, you change the shape of your skull. When your skull is really specialized for digging really, really, really well, what might it not be specialized well for? Eating. So we have an exchange here. This is one of these lifestyle trade-offs. Am I really good at eating, or am I really good at digging a tunnel? So in the end, which one actually wins almost all of the time? The ones that can eat replace the generalists replacing everybody else. Which moves us on, I think, to some overalls about our snakes. How would you describe these two snakes? Somebody. What's different? Patterns. Shape of the heads are very different. One's a lot longer than the other. Which one do you think is going to move faster? Top or bottom?
Top.
It's the bottom one. Why? Your thinner snakes tend to, on average, move faster than your thicker snakes. Not always true. We have a couple different types of snakes here. We have an arboreal snake in A. In C. And then we have a burrowing blind snake, which is showing you the head and the tail of for D. E is a puff adder. You can see the shape of the head, that large head. And then F is our C snake with the modified tail. If you look at the cross section of the trunk versus the cross section of the tail, you see the tail looks very different from the rest of the snake. Phylogenetically, these guys are debated. They're squamates. They evolve on land. We know they come from lizards. But they range in size from less than 10 centimeters to more than 10 meters in length. Body forms are really, really specialized. And each group has different specializations. So there's no overall snake standard physiology anatomy answers. For some things there are, but for other things, like even the lung, well, do they have both lungs? Do they have one lung? Do they have a severely reduced lung? Do they have two normal lungs? We have a primitive group that contains your small burrowing shakes with shiny scales and reduced eyes. In your early group, like this one, there's the traces of the pelvic girdle. But the big thing that differentiates them from the legless lizards is the skull. The snake skull is different, considerably different from our lizard skull.
Wait, that's the main separation?
Well, that's one. It's one of the main separations. For these guys, that is a main separation, because if you had a legless lizard and one of these primitive snakes together, they can look fairly similar, but the skull is going to be one of your big differences. They derive from a subterranean lineage of lizard who was legless. We believe that historically, evolutionarily, the eyes were gone and the eyes have redeveloped. Which is another big difference. Snake eyes and lizard eyes. Are they different? Very different. In some of them, we have a lot of them that have these vertical pupil openings, and that would be why we see this very large difference in eye structure, because the eyes were something that redeveloped as opposed to just modified in one direction. There are burrowing snakes, the boas and the pythons. We talked a little bit last time. Which one is found? It's on there. The boas are your new world, the pythons are your old world. And the largest snake currently alive, does anyone know who it is?
Is the anaconda?
Anaconda at 10 meters as a full-size adult, 33 feet of snake. You now know why they make horror movies about an anaconda, yes? But there are some in this group that are tiny, and then you have the wart snakes, which are aquatic. We will pick up with the colubrid on Friday.
Oh, it feels like Friday.
Doesn't it feel like Friday, Trent?
This has been the slowest week. Yeah,